My name is Agnes Worley, I'm 31 years old, and my sister stood up at my rehearsal dinner. Drunk on the wine my mother kept pouring, and said, "I need to say something. For 12 years I've been sleeping with every man you dated, including—" The room gasped. My fiancé, Everett, stood up slowly. He didn't look shocked. He looked sad. And he said, "I know, and so does she." I watched my mother's fork stop halfway to her mouth. I watched my father's face do nothing, which was the thing that finally broke me. 6 months earlier, Briar had tried to sleep with Everett. She didn't know he had a Ring doorbell with audio. She didn't know he drove to my hospital that same night. And she didn't know tonight's dinner was a trap. I should tell you how we got here, because a rehearsal dinner doesn't end that way by accident. You don't pour wine for your younger daughter at a table of 63 people and watch her stand up with a butter knife and assume nothing is coming. My mother poured that wine knowing exactly what she hoped would happen. What she didn't know was that every hand at the table except hers had been waiting 6 months for this exact sentence. I grew up in Millbrook, Ohio. 8,200 people, 1 stoplight that mattered, and 5 families whose names you learned before kindergarten. The Worleys were one of them. My grandfather opened Worley Hardware in 1962. My father, Dwayne, runs 3 locations now, including the flagship on Main Street, with the red awning that hasn't been changed since the Reagan administration. In Millbrook, being a Worley meant people smiled at you before they knew your first name. They smiled at my mother, Nadine, who taught Sunday school at First Methodist for 22 years. They smiled at my sister, Briar, who was born 4 years after me and was called the pretty one from the age of 6. And they smiled at me politely because I was the smart one, which is the code phrase small-town Midwestern mothers use when they want to tell their friends that one daughter will be fine on her own, and the other one will need to be protected. I am telling you this because it matters. It is the soil everything else grew out of. My mother decided somewhere early that Briar was hers and I was my own. My father decided nothing. He let my mother decide. His chair on the back porch, his Miller Lite, his low country radio, his silence. Whenever something happened to me as a child, something the adults should have stepped into, my father would say, "Your mother will handle it." She did handle it. She handled it by making sure nothing was ever a problem for Briar. The tablecloth my grandmother used on Sundays, the lace one with the strawberries, has lived in Briar's apartment since 2019 because Briar borrowed it and never brought it back. Nobody asked for it back. In the Worley house, things drifted toward Briar and stayed there. The first thing that drifted was a boy named Trevor Landon. It was the summer of 2013. I was 19, home for break after my first year at Ohio State, and Trevor drove down from his dorm to meet my family. Briar was 15. She opened the door in a mustard-colored tank top I had bought her for her 14th birthday. I saw Trevor's eyes do the thing men's eyes do when a teenage girl has decided, at 15, to be noticed. 3 weeks later, Trevor stopped answering my calls. 7 years later, he would send me a message on Facebook that began, "I was 20, she told me she was 18. I didn't reply. I didn't need to. By then, I already knew. What I didn't know at 19 was that Trevor wasn't the beginning. He was only the first one I noticed. And when I tried to tell my mother, she poured me a cup of coffee and said, "Your sister is just learning to be a woman. Don't make this a thing." That was the sentence. That was the foundation. For 12 years, every time a man walked out of my life without explanation, my mother had already handed me the sentence to use against myself. Don't make this a thing. The second one I remember is Connor Ashby. I was 24. Connor sold insurance in Cleveland, had the kind of steady hands you trust without noticing, and he asked me to marry him after 14 months. We set a date for April 2018. 2 weeks before the wedding, Briar drove up to Cleveland to help him plan a bachelor surprise. She stayed 2 nights. She called me the 3rd morning, crying quietly into the phone, and said, "Agnes, I don't know how to say this gently. Connor isn't the man for you." Those were her exact words. Not he made a pass at me, not he hurt me. Just, he isn't the man for you, which was designed to let me fill in the blank in the worst possible direction. I filled it in the worst possible direction. I called off the wedding. I gave the ring back by FedEx because I couldn't bear to see his face. He tried to reach me. He drove to First Methodist on the Sunday I should have been getting married, stood in the parking lot, and tried to walk in. My mother, in her usher's pearl cardigan, met him at the door and told him he was a disgrace and to never contact her daughter again. He left. I didn't know he had come until 7 years later, when he sat across from me in a coffee shop in Cleveland and slid a folder of saved text messages across the table and said, "Your mother wrote this, Agnes. Look at the date, but I am getting ahead of myself." After Connor, I stopped dating for 2 years. I moved to Columbus. I finished nursing school at the top of my class because pain is an excellent study partner. I took a job at Nationwide Children's in the ICU, which is the kind of job that teaches you what it looks like when a body stops fighting. 7 seconds usually. That's how long it takes a heart monitor to tell you what a family will spend the rest of their life not understanding. I got good at that job. I got very, very good at it. Meanwhile, at the end of 2021, Briar showed up at my new house in Columbus with 4 cardboard boxes and a story about a breakup and a lease that fell through. My mother had coached her on the way down. "Just 3 months, Agnes. She needs her sister." Briar moved into the studio above my garage. She promised to be out by my 28th birthday. By the time I met Everett, those 4 boxes were still in my upstairs hallway, and Briar had been upstairs for 3 years and 2 months. And I still hadn't asked her to leave, because every time I came close, my mother would call and say, "Your sister is fragile, Agnes. You can afford to be generous." Miles Rourke was the 3rd one, a Columbus architect, 30 years old, warm in a careful way. We met in October 2022. I did something I had never done before. I didn't tell Briar for 8 weeks. I kept Miles for myself, the way a hungry person hides bread. And then, on a Thursday, Briar just happened to walk into Denmark Trail Wine Bar while I was there with him, and sat on stool number 4 and ordered the same drink as me, and within 20 minutes had Miles laughing at a story I had never heard before. Miles stopped calling 6 weeks later. His last email said, "I'm sorry. Ask your sister. I didn't ask her. I couldn't. I wasn't ready yet to know what the answer would be. I would find out eventually when Everett tracked Miles down in Denver in September 2025. And Miles recorded a voicemail that said, "I told you back then. You weren't ready to hear it. I hope you're ready now." Patrick Quillen came in the spring of 2023, a high school history teacher, soft-spoken, the kind of man who remembered what you said the first time. We dated 5 months. I got the flu in August. I was in bed with a fever of 102, and I texted Briar from the couch and asked her to drop off soup. She dropped off soup. She also, while I was half-conscious upstairs, invited Patrick over to keep her company. I heard her voice in my kitchen through the floorboards. I heard the pan scrape. I heard her laugh. Patrick left 2 hours later. He called me the next morning, flat and distant, and said he needed to think. He thought for 6 days. Then he broke up with me in a parking lot. I drove home. I walked into my kitchen. The marinara pot was still on the stove, still warm. Briar was gone. I sat down on the floor, and for the first time in 10 years, I let myself say the thing out loud. "She's been doing this the whole time." I said it to nobody. I said it to the marinara pot. And then I got up and I washed it and I put it back in the cabinet, because that is what I had been trained to do. I did not yet know about Connor. I did not yet know about Miles's full story. I did not yet know that my mother had handwritten a text to Connor in 2018 that read, "Do not break a family over a moment of weakness." All I knew in that moment on the kitchen floor was that a pattern had a name, and the name was my sister. And the person who had built the pattern was standing in First Methodist every Sunday teaching children about truth. So I knew, but knowing and proving are not the same thing. And proving, for a woman in a small Ohio town with one stoplight that mattered, would take a kind of man I had not yet met. I met him in April 2024. A friend's wedding in Columbus, table 9, white tablecloths, vanilla cake. Everett Bancroft was 33 then, a security consultant who ran red team operations for financial firms, which is a polite way of saying he got paid to break into places and show the owners how they had been lied to. He sat down next to me and watched me eat both pieces of cake and then said, "You're the only person here eating like you worked a double yesterday." I laughed. It was the first real laugh I had laughed in 18 months. We talked until 2 in the morning. He didn't ask for my number. He asked for my email, which I have since learned is what a man does when he is 33 and done wasting anyone's time. 14 months later, we were engaged. I didn't bring him to Millbrook until April of 2025. I had a feeling. I didn't know what the feeling was yet, but I knew to trust it. And then one Sunday, I drove him up to my parents' house for lunch. Briar was there. She was wearing a white linen dress that was slightly too short for Sunday lunch, and a shade of lipstick she only wore when she was planning something. She shook Everett's hand and held it for 4 seconds too long. I counted. You learn to count at 12 years of counting. Everett didn't react in the moment, but in the parking lot of the diner where we stopped for coffee on the drive home, he turned off the ignition and said, "Your sister asked me 4 questions. None of them were about you." I looked at him. He looked at me. He said, "I interview liars for a living, Agnes. Your sister is not subtle." That was the first time in 12 years that a man had seen Briar clearly in under 30 minutes, and he had not filled in any blank for her. He had looked at her, and then he had looked at me, and he had chosen me. I didn't cry in the parking lot. I put my hand on his and said, "I think she's going to try something, and I don't know what I'm going to do about it." He said, "Then we wait, and we watch." That was April. He was right. She tried something on the 14th of June, June 14th, 2025. I was working a double at Nationwide Children's. Critical transport in from a highway accident at 7. A second admission at 9:40, the kind of night where you forget to drink water. Everett was at home, working late in the kitchen on a contract for a bank in Louisville. At 10:52 p.m., our Ring doorbell recognized a face. The face was Briar's. She was wearing a silk robe the color of a pond in late summer, green and slick. It was the Christmas gift I had given her in 2022. She had a bottle of wine in one hand. Everett did not open the door. He watched the feed on his phone, and he listened. She pressed the bell 3 times. Then she pressed the intercom. She said, "Everett, open up. Agnes is working a double. I have a key. I just want to talk." He didn't answer. He took his keys and his laptop, and he got in his car, and he drove 28 minutes to my hospital. He waited in the parking lot from 11:30 to 4:12 in the morning. When I came out of the sliding doors at 4:12, in scrubs still stained with a 12-year-old's blood from a bike accident we couldn't save, he was leaning against my driver's side door with his laptop closed under his arm. He said, "You don't have to watch. I can call the police and make it a report. You just tell me what you want." I said, "Show me." He opened the laptop. He played 3 minutes and 18 seconds of footage. I watched my sister in the silk robe I had given her try to talk my fiancé into opening our front door. I watched her voice slip into the register she used on my boyfriends when I was not in the room. I watched her say, "You don't have to tell her anything." I did not cry. I closed the laptop. I looked at Everett. I said, "Don't tell her we know. Not yet. I want to see how far my mother will go." He nodded once. He said, "However long you need." We drove home in separate cars. At my kitchen table, I took out a black moleskin notebook I had bought 3 years earlier and never used. On the first page, I wrote 3 words: who, when, why. On the last page, in pencil, I wrote one name: Connor. I did not know yet, at 4:30 in the morning, why I had written it. I only knew that if I was going to do this properly, I was going to need the witness my family had spent 7 years pretending did not exist. The next 6 months became the most careful work I have ever done. Everett called it tier building. I called it the ledger. We had 6 tiers by the time Thanksgiving came around. Tier 1 was the footage itself. Everett copied it to 3 separate locations: an external drive in his office safe, a private cloud account in his name, and a red USB labeled J14 that he sealed in an envelope and gave to a lawyer named Sheila Torrance in Columbus. Sheila had handled his sister's divorce 3 years earlier. She read the transcript of the footage in 10 minutes and said, "What do you want?" I said, "Patience, for now." Tier 2 was Connor. I found him on LinkedIn in early July. His profile said he was an insurance broker in Cleveland and had 2 stepchildren. I wrote him 1 paragraph. I said I was sorry for what my family had done to him, that I had only just begun to understand it, and that if he was ever willing to talk, I would drive to wherever he was. He wrote back in 4 hours. We met on a Saturday at a coffee shop called Phoenix on the east side of Cleveland, and he brought a manila folder. Inside the folder were printouts of text messages from my mother to him, dated March 2018. She had blocked him officially as the family story, but privately she had written him one last message on the morning of what would have been our wedding. It said, "Do not break a family over a moment of weakness. My daughter will heal if you disappear. Disappear, Connor." Connor said, "I kept it for 7 years. I didn't know why. I do now." He looked at me across the table. He did not apologize, because he had done nothing to apologize for, and I loved him for not wasting our time with guilt. He said, "Whatever you need, I'll come. You tell me the day." I told him I didn't know yet what day it would be. I told him there would be a rehearsal dinner. He said, "Send me the date when you know. I'll be there." We shook hands. I drove back to Columbus, and I pasted his messages into my moleskin, and I underlined the word disappear until the pen went through the page. Tier 3 was Miles and Patrick. Everett tracked Miles to Denver through a mutual friend in September. Miles wrote me a 4-page email on plain white paper, printed and mailed, because he said he did not trust anything that could be forwarded. He said what he should have said in 2022, and he apologized for being a coward. Patrick never answered, but his wife did. She found me on Facebook 2 weeks later and wrote one sentence. Patrick told me what happened. "If you need me, I'm ready." I did not need her yet, but I saved her name. Tier 4 was the lawyer. In October, Sheila Torrance pulled together 2 files, both in red folders. The first was a 30-day notice to quit for the studio above my garage, which I owned outright and which Breyer had occupied without a lease for 4 years. The second was a demand letter covering 6 years of what my parents had always called family loans. Money Breyer had taken from me in increments of $500 and $1,000, totaling just under $31,000, which I had documented in a single spreadsheet I had kept only because I could not help myself. Sheila said, "Do you want to serve her while she's drunk, or after?" I said, "After. I want her to remember it." Tier 5 was the hardest. In November, I invited my mother to brunch, just the 2 of us, at Denmark Trail. I had not been alone with her in 18 months. She wore a camel coat I had bought her 3 Christmases ago, and she ordered a lavender latte, and she stirred it for a full minute before she drank it. I asked her quietly how she thought Breyer was doing. I let her talk. My phone was face down on the table, recording. She talked for 9 minutes. Somewhere in the middle, she said, "Breyer only does it because she feels less than you. You have to understand your sister. You were always the one of discipline. She wasn't made for that." I nodded. I asked her how long she had known Breyer did what she did. She smiled. She said, "Agnes, honey. Mothers know. Mothers know from the first boy." Then she drank her latte. I went home. I sent Everett the recording. My message said, "It's enough." Tier 6 was the venue. Everett had done a security audit for Anthony Genovese in 2019 when Anthony was opening his second restaurant. Anthony's younger daughter had a sister like mine. Everett drove down to Genovese's on a Tuesday in early December, sat with Anthony in the kitchen, and explained carefully what he wanted. Anthony said, "Every corner, 2 cameras, you record, you don't broadcast." And I watch from the back. Everett installed them himself the next morning. 2 cameras in the private room. 1 in the lamp on table 3, 1 behind the curtain in the east corner. I went in 5 days before the dinner to taste the menu. I looked directly into the lamp on table 3, and I did not smile. 10 days before the wedding, Everett laid a folder on our kitchen counter. The tab read, "For Saturday." He said, "If you want to stop, we stop. This is the last time I'll ask." I pushed it back across the counter. I said, "Saturday we marry. Friday is for Breyer." He took a breath. He said, "You know Connor said he'd come the morning of. Do you want him there the night before?" I thought about it. I said, "No. I want him at 7 a.m. on the wedding day. If she tries something that night, she should think she got away with it. Let her sleep one more night, believing she's won." I did not know, that evening, that Connor had already decided, privately, to drive down the night before. I did not know he would walk through the door of Genovese's at 8:41 on Friday, a folder in his hand, and end the chapter of my life that had started on the Sunday he had stood in a church parking lot, Nobody had let him enter. Saturday evening, December 13th, 2025. The rehearsal dinner. Geneviese's private room. 63 guests. A prime rib station on the back wall. A linguine course my mother had insisted on. The lamp on table 3 humming. Briar arrived at 7:28 in a red dress I had tried on at a boutique in Columbus 3 weeks earlier and decided not to buy because it was too rich for a Friday. She knew. She had always known. She had been tracking my shopping since I was 20. She walked into the room and she took the seat next to Everett's place card. Everett had swapped the cards 15 minutes before. Briar discovered she was seated next to Pastor Glenford. She smiled at him because she was Briar and because Briar could work anyone in Millbrook in under a minute. My mother was already at the end of the table with a bottle of Caymus Cabernet. The restaurant had poured the first round. My mother took the bottle from the server's hand, smiled, and said, "I'll pour. It's a special night." She filled Briar's glass first. Briar drank it in 14 minutes. My mother refilled it. I watched. Everett watched. Hazel, my maid of honor and my best friend since 4th grade, leaned over to me while my mother was reaching for the bottle a third time and whispered, "Agnes, are you sure?" I nodded. Hazel said, "Look at her." I said, "I'm looking. That's the whole point." Reed Baxter, Everett's younger brother, gave the best man's toast first. It was 3 minutes and warm and funny and left everyone comfortable. Hazel gave the maid of honor's toast next. She told the story of how she had met me in 4th grade when I had stood in front of a bully picking on a smaller girl and refused to move. She said, "Agnes has been protecting other people her whole life. I've been waiting 23 years for someone to protect her." When she raised her glass at the end of the toast, she clinked mine, and she did not clink Briar's, and Briar saw. Briar drained her third glass and waited. My father was invited to speak next. He stood. He was wearing the gray suit he had worn to my grandfather's funeral, the only suit he owned. He held the glass in his hand, and his hand shook. It was the first time in 31 years of my life that I had seen my father's hand shake. He opened his mouth and he closed it, and he opened it again, and he said, "To my daughter Agnes, and to Everett, a good man, a good man." Then he sat down. The whole toast took 11 seconds. I looked at him, he looked at the tablecloth. And in that second, I understood that my father had known, at least in part, for longer than he had ever let on, and that the reason his hand was shaking was that he knew what was coming, and he had decided again to say nothing. My mother poured Briar's 4th glass. Briar stood up. She tapped the blade of her butter knife against the side of her wine glass. 3 clean rings. And the room fell silent like she had been waiting her whole life for a room to fall silent for her. Which I realized then she had. "I need to say something," Briar said. My mother smiled. I watched the smile. It was a smile that thought it was getting a toast. Briar looked around the room slowly. She was doing the thing she did, where she made everyone feel individually looked at. She was good at it. She was the best in the family at it. She had been practicing since she was 6. "I love my sister," Briar said. "I have loved her my whole life. But I cannot stand up tomorrow as her maid, as her sister. I cannot stand next to her with this on my chest." Everett put his phone on the table face down. He rested one finger on top of it. That was the only move he made. Briar took a breath. Her eyes were already wet. She had learned early how to get her eyes wet on command. "For 12 years, she said, "I have been sleeping with every man my sister has ever dated." The room did not gasp yet. The room had not caught up. The first 3 seconds after she said it, the only sound was the clink of Pastor Glenford's knife and fork being set down very carefully on the edge of his plate, parallel to each other, like a man who has just realized he is in the wrong building. "Trevor Landon," Briar said. "The summer of 2013. I was 15. Agnes didn't know. Connor Ashby. The spring of 2018. 2 weeks before the wedding that never happened. Miles Rourke. 2022. 8 weeks in." She took a breath. "Patrick Quillen. 2023. Now the room gasped. It gasped low, like a room that had been holding its breath without knowing. Aunt Dolores, at the far end of the table, said, "Lord in heaven." Mayor's wife Rosalind Kittredge took her phone out. She did not raise it. She texted one line to her husband at the bar next door. Bill, come here now. My mother stood up at her end of the table. Briar, honey, sit down. Briar shook her head. Mom, I've been quiet too long. You told me to stay quiet. I can't anymore. She was crying now. The tears were very well placed. And, she said, turning her head toward Everett, including. Everett stood up. He did not raise his voice. He did not push his chair back hard. He folded his napkin the way my father had folded his napkin 4 minutes earlier, and he set it on the table beside his plate. He said quietly across the 63 guests, I know, and so does she. The room turned as one toward me. I was smiling. It was a very small smile. It was not triumphant. It was the smile of a woman who had been waiting too long for a sentence. I said the first thing I had said all evening. I said, sit down, Briar. Everett has something he'd like everyone to see. Briar did not sit down. She stood for another moment, and for the first time in her life, she turned to look at our mother, because that is what Briar had done her entire life. She had looked at Nadine to know what to do next, and Nadine, and I will remember this for as long as I live, did not look back. Nadine looked at the floor. Briar's mouth opened slightly, and she sat, not gracefully, like her legs had been cut. Everett uncapped the red USB marked J14 and slid it into his laptop. The television on the far wall of the private room, which had been turned off all evening and which the guests had assumed was decorative, came on. The Ring doorbell footage began to play. There was no soundtrack. There was no editing. There was a green silk robe. There was my sister's voice, unmistakable to everyone in that room who had known her since she was a child, saying, Agnes is working a double. You don't have to tell her anything. Aunt Dolores said, Lord in heaven again, the same words, the only words she had. Pastor Glenford did not cover his eyes. He watched. It was his job to watch. He had christened Briar at 8 weeks old in 1998, and he was going to watch now. Everett stopped the footage at 3 minutes and 18 seconds. He turned to my mother. He did not look angry. He looked the way he had looked in the parking lot in Columbus in April, patient and sorry and professional. He said, Mrs. Worley, I have one more clip. You can tell the room yourself or I can play it. Your choice. My mother's mouth moved without sound. She looked at my father. My father looked at the floor. That was his answer. That had always been his answer. Everett pressed play on the brunch recording. My mother's voice came through the restaurant's sound system, clean and close and unmistakable. The voice she used in church. The voice she used to comfort other mothers in grief. Briar only does it because she feels less than you. You are always the one of discipline. She wasn't made for that. 14 seconds. Then, mothers know, Agnes. Mothers know from the first boy. Mayor's wife Rosalind stood up and walked out of the private room. She did not leave the restaurant. She stepped into the hallway to call someone. You could hear her voice, muffled, from behind the glass door. She was telling someone in the town, someone who was not yet in the room, what had just happened. By the time Mrs. Kittredge came back, which she did 3 minutes later, Millbrook had begun to learn. My father looked up from the floor for the first time all evening. He looked directly at me, across the length of the table, and his lips moved without sound. And the shape they made was, I'm sorry. I did not nod. I did not shake my head. I simply held his eyes. That was the first real conversation my father and I had ever had. The front door of the restaurant opened at 8:41. He was not supposed to come until 7 a.m. the next morning. I had been clear. But Connor Ashby walked through the front door of Genovese's at 8:41 on a Friday night, 33 years old, in a navy wool coat, holding a manila folder I recognized from the coffee shop in Cleveland 5 months earlier. He walked into the private room and stopped at the end of the table, across from my father. He did not look at me. He did not look at Briar. He looked at the room. My name is Connor Ashby, he said. In the spring of 2018, I was going to marry Agnes Worley. 2 weeks before our wedding, Briar came to my apartment in Cleveland. She stayed. She made sure Agnes found out in the worst possible way, so that Agnes would believe it was my fault. Agnes called off our wedding. I went to our church on the Sunday morning we should have been married to try to speak to her. Her mother stopped me at the door and told me I was a disgrace. I kept the text messages Mrs. Worley wrote to me before and after that Sunday. I have kept them for 7 years. I didn't know why I kept them. He paused. I know now. He placed the folder on the table in front of me, not in front of my mother, not in front of Briar, in front of me. Pastor Glenford rose slowly from his chair. He walked the length of the table. He opened the folder. He read the top page. He recognized my mother's handwriting instantly. He read it twice. He then turned to my mother, and in the voice he had used for 22 years to baptize the children of Millbrook, he said, Nadine, I trusted you for 12 years. You told me Briar was only sensitive. You told me Agnes exaggerated. You told me Connor was Agnes's mistake. I trusted you. He closed the folder. On Sunday, I will not be officiating Agnes and Everett's wedding. I cannot stand in front of God and pretend tonight didn't happen. My mother made a small sound. It was not a word. My father took her hand. He held it for 3 seconds. Then he let go. That was a small thing. You would have missed it if you weren't watching. I was watching. It was the first decision my father had made on his own in 31 years. He stood. Agnes, he said. He did not try to come to my end of the table. He stayed where he was. I knew, not all of it, but enough. And I didn't say, because I was afraid the house would come apart. The house was already apart. I just didn't want to look. You don't owe me forgiveness. I'm asking you to know one thing. I'm looking now. I didn't speak right away. My father was crying. He was not covering his face. I had never, in 31 years, seen my father cry without covering his face. I said, Sit down, Dad. There's one more thing. I stood up for the first time that evening. I did not pick up a glass. I walked to Briar's end of the table. In my hand was a cream-colored envelope I had taken from my purse 10 minutes earlier and which had sat in my lap for the entire rehearsal dinner. I placed it on her plate, next to the butter knife she had used to get the room's attention. Briar, I said, this is a 72-hour notice. The studio above my garage, which I own, which has always been mine, which you have never been on a lease for. You need to be out by 9 a.m., Monday morning. My attorney, Sheila Torrance, will be there. The wedding will still happen tomorrow. You are not invited, and please do not call me again until I call you. If I call you. Briar did not open the envelope. She looked one last time at our mother. Our mother did not look back. It was the second time that night. It is important to me that you understand this. Twice in one evening, my mother did not look at Briar when Briar needed her to. That is the thing that did it. Not the footage, not the audio, not Connor. The moment my mother stopped looking. Briar had built her entire life on being looked at. And when the looking stopped, she was a stranger in a red dress, in a room of 63 people who had watched her since she was an infant and who did not recognize her anymore. Everett walked down the length of the table and took my hand. He said to the room, not loud, "Thank you for coming. We will see some of you tomorrow. The ceremony is at 11. Then he and I walked out. Hazel walked behind us. Reed walked behind Hazel. Anthony Genovese held the front door for us. And he did not charge my father for the dinner. He told me later, months later, that he ate the cost himself because some things should not be paid for. I slept 4 hours that night. I woke up at 7 the next morning, December 14th, in the hotel suite Everett had booked. Hazel was in the living room already, drinking coffee in the robe the hotel gave her. I sat down across from her. She said, "Are you hungry?" I said, "Yes." "That's strange." She said, "It's not strange. It's the first morning of the rest of it." She made me eggs. I ate them. At 7:40 my phone buzzed. It was my father. "Can I walk you in?" 3 words. I read them. I put the phone down. I did not answer right away. Hazel watched my face. She didn't say anything. I thought about the 11-second toast. I thought about the hand he let go of. 3 seconds, the night before. I thought about what it would mean to walk in alone. I thought about what it would mean to let him. I wrote back, "No, I'm walking in by myself. But you can sit in the front row." He wrote, "Okay." 12 people had already sent me messages in the night, carefully phrased, saying they could not come today. I wrote back to each of them, "Thank you for being honest. I meant it. Small-town honesty, when it finally arrives, is one of the cleanest gifts you can receive." We held the wedding at First Methodist anyway. Pastor Glenford had refused, as promised. But a younger minister from the next town, Pastor Yeardley, agreed overnight to step in. 51 people came. They filled the front of the church. The back rows were empty. My mother and father sat in the third row from the back. Together, they did not come to the front. That was my choice. I did not ask them to come to the front. I had chosen low flat shoes, ivory, because I wanted to walk steadily, on my own, and I did not want to be carried by any fabric or any man or any family. I walked down the aisle alone. Everett was waiting at the altar, and when I looked at him, his eyes were wet, but he did not cry, and that was a kindness to me, because I did not want to be the one who cried at my own wedding. Everett read traditional vows, short, clean. I read vows I had written myself, and I read them slowly because I wanted the people in the third row from the back to hear every word. I said, I grew up in a house where silence was the default language. You have given me a house where the truth doesn't get you punished. I'm not marrying you because you saved me. I'm marrying you because you stood still next to me while I saved myself. When I said that line, I did not look at the third row from the back, but I heard my mother make a small sound. I did not turn. We kissed. A photographer's lens caught my father at that second. I saw the photograph later. His eyes were closed, and his face was the face of a man in prayer. I don't know yet what I want to do with that photograph. I have it in a drawer. The reception was held at a small inn on the edge of Millbrook. We did not do formal toasts. We ate, we laughed. Hazel stood up once, unofficially, with a glass of champagne, and she said, I told Agnes in the 4th grade that she protected other people before she protected herself. Last night was the first time in 23 years I ever saw her protect herself. I'm going to tell that story at every dinner I ever go to until I die. Everyone laughed. I laughed. During our first dance, I leaned up to Everett's ear and whispered, I thought I'd be exhausted. I'm not. I just see clearly. Monday morning, we were in Charleston. I had thought in October about canceling the honeymoon. I didn't. Some things you cannot let your sister take from you, or she wins a final round you will never stop paying for. We flew out Sunday night. At 9 a.m., Monday, Charleston time, Sheila Torrance called from Ohio. She said, It's done. The locks are changed. The studio is empty. Briar's belongings had been packed into 9 boxes and delivered to my parents' house. My mother, Sheila told me, had refused to accept them. The boxes had sat on the curb on Main Street, in front of the Worley house, visible from the hardware store, for 6 full hours before my father finally came out and carried them into the garage. He carried them himself. He did not ask for help. He did not call my mother out to help. Sheila said, I watched him from my car. He looked like a man lifting stones. By early afternoon Eastern time, an Instagram story had gone up on Briar's account. It showed her face in soft light, no makeup, and 1 line of text. My family abandoned me. Within an hour, one of Briar's former high school friends, a woman named Erica Poole, who had been in a private group chat with Briar since 2019, and who had spent 3 years privately disgusted by what Briar had been saying in that chat, took screenshots of the chat and posted them. The screenshots went through Millbrook like weather. The chat contained, in Briar's own words, messages going back to 2019 describing how she had approached each of my boyfriends. The oldest message in the chat said, Every time Agnes brings a guy home, Mom pours her an extra glass. It's the easiest thing in the world. By 3 p.m., 53 people in Millbrook had that screenshot on their phones. By 5, every one of my mother's Sunday school parents had it. By Tuesday, my mother had quietly stepped down from her volunteer position at First Methodist. Pastor Glenford did not announce it. He didn't need to. At 4:30 p.m., Monday, my father called me. I was standing on the balcony of our hotel in Charleston, looking out at the Battery, and my phone lit up. And I looked at his name on the screen for a long time before I answered. I answered on the 5th ring. He said, Agnes, I'm calling by myself. Your mother doesn't know I'm calling. I'm not asking you to forgive me. I'm asking you to let me learn how to be your father. I didn't answer right away. I watched a cargo ship in the harbor move 1 inch every time I blinked. I said, I'll listen. Not this week. I'm on my honeymoon. I'll call you when I'm home. I said it flat. I did not soften it. He said, Yes, okay. I hung up. Everett was behind me on the balcony. He did not ask what my father had said. He handed me a glass of water. He said, Drink that. I drank it. I cried, a little, standing against him. Not loud. I had loved my father my whole life. I did not know yet how to love him again from the beginning. But the fact that he had called by himself, for the first time in 31 years, without my mother next to him in the kitchen nodding him through, that was the fact. That was the only fact I had to hold on to. 3 months later, I let him come to Columbus. I gave him 30 minutes on the back porch of my house, the house I now shared with Everett. I made him black coffee. He did not ask for a beer. He used to drink a Miller Lite on any porch, in any weather. He did not ask for one. He sat with the coffee cooling in his hands, and he said, "I don't need you to fix me, Agnes. I need you to be present. Those are different things." He nodded. "Those are different things," he repeated. He stayed 30 minutes. He did not push for more. He stood. He hugged me. He drove back to Ohio. My mother has not come. I have not invited her. Briar has moved to Cincinnati. She posts now and then a short video about rebuilding and toxic family dynamics to an audience of 300 followers, most of them women who do not know what she did. The videos do not mention my name. The videos do not mention our mother. The videos describe her always as a survivor of family estrangement. That is how she has phrased it now. I do not watch them often. Hazel watches them and sends me the worst ones. I delete them without replying. Some people do not heal. Some people only find new audiences. I have made my peace with that distinction. Connor sent me one letter in January. He did not ask to meet. He did not ask for forgiveness because he was never the one who needed to be forgiven. He said only, "Thank you for finding me. I am glad I was able to be useful. I hope you have a long, quiet life." I keep his letter in the back of my moleskin, behind the last page, behind the pencil-written name that began this whole ledger. Hazel and I have coffee every Sunday now. Everett works. I work. We bought a small dog. I named her Bridget. Everett said, "Bridget is an old woman's name." I said, "I feel like an old woman in the best way." He laughed. He agreed. On a Saturday in early spring, I drove back to Millbrook alone. I did not tell my parents I was coming. I did not go to the house. I drove to First Methodist and parked across the street. I walked around to the back of the church, where there was a small wooden footbridge over a creek my grandmother had walked us across when Briar and I were very small. The creek was still partly frozen. The spring wind had started, but not the green. I stood on the bridge for a long time. I thought about the mustard-colored tank top. I thought about the lavender latte. I thought about the silk robe. I thought about the butter knife. I thought about the third row from the back. I said it aloud because I wanted to hear my own voice say it. I said, "I don't forgive. I just don't carry anymore." Then I stepped off the bridge. I did not look back at the church. I walked to my car. My phone buzzed. It was Everett. "Dinner at home?" I wrote back one word. "Home." I started the car. I drove out of Millbrook, past the Worley Hardware sign with the red awning from the Reagan administration, past the stoplight that mattered, past the house I had grown up in, and I did not slow down. It was a 2-hour drive to Columbus. I made it in 1 hour and 45 minutes. Everett met me at the door with a kitchen towel over his shoulder. He had made roast chicken. Bridget was asleep on the rug. He kissed the top of my head. He said, "Welcome home." I said, "I'm home." And for the first time in my 31 years, I knew exactly what that word meant.